Okay, can you move in, please, and find seats on the floor, if not in chairs? If we'd known all of you were coming, we would have gotten a bigger place to meet. Wow. Good morning. I'm happy to welcome all of you to the League of Women Voters of Iowa State Program Day. It's wonderful to see so many of you. We promised you this would be bigger and better than ever, and you have already proved us right on the first score, and we're soon to be proven right on the second. We're delighted to have so many students with us today. I want to thank the Ames League of Women Voters for again extending their hospitality to the League, and particularly to thank Valerie Shulvin, our state action chairman, who has made the arrangements for our meetings. State board members are at your service. You can identify state board members by a special name tag. Also, we were here yesterday, and so we have an advantage over you. We can tell you where all the restrooms are. It used to be said that you could tell a state board because they were the ones with the biggest circles under their eyes. But I deny this. I've seen even bigger circles under local league presidents' eyes. It is true, though, that the state board members may have some kind of anxious looks on their faces because they have to get a report into the state office by Monday for your MIDI board report, and the way the mails are running, they should have mailed it the day before yesterday. So they're a little nervous. I'm not going to introduce the state board members except to the last two who have come on the board since state convention. We have a new treasurer, Joanne Tyler from Newton. Would you stand up, Joanne, right here? And Jane Tieford from Waterloo Cedar Falls is new on the board, and she will do field service. So those of you who want to make an appointment or talk about your communicator or find out about having board training, Jane will be in the lobby to the South Ballroom off and on during the day, so you can find her there. There are kits for presidents at the publications table. Be sure you pick up this envelope because it has some valuable things in it. Now, I have to announce some changes in the rooms, so if you will listen carefully and take out your pencils, we've had to move because of the enormity of the crowd. So from 11 to 12:30, the U.S. Congress group will meet in the South Ballroom. That's this room right here. You just stay put. Juvenile Justice will meet in room 205. Land Use, room 201. Revenue Sharing, room 206. Then at 12:30, we will go through the cafeteria line on the ground floor and bring your trays up to the Great Hall right next. Then this afternoon, U.S. Congress will meet again in the South Ballroom. Juvenile Justice again in room 205. Land Use, room 201. Human Resources, room 206. And Taxes will meet in room 59 at the ground level. That's a good place for taxes. Okay, now I have just one more thing to say, and that is that one of the most valuable things about a state workshop is the chance to meet other league members and to mix with them. So during the day, when you can, don't stick with your own league. Mix around and meet some members of the other leagues. At lunch, look for a different bunch. Because you really are great people and you ought to get to know each other. I'll say one word about the floppy hats. That's the busload from Fort Dodge, one of our new provisional leagues. And they came in a great, something like 38 of them. That's wonderful. Now, we have a member of the state board who sometimes gets very impractical and dreams impossible dreams. She came into state office one day and said, "I've got a great idea. Let's ask Clark Molenhoff to come and speak to us for our state workshop." And we said, "Why, that's a great idea. Of course, he'll never come, but you know, it was good of you to have that idea." So now to tell you how that all worked out, I want you to meet the state chairman of the representative government item, Gene Fortner.
In answer to our great president, I think I've been, dreaming impossible dreams about the U.S. Congress item for a long time. Years and years, they finally came through. When we did first talk about a speaker, there was only one man we wanted to come for our speaker. And as league members, of course, you are used to having and using the very best sources available, so we couldn't do any less for you now. Our speaker has been on the Washington scene for 23 years. He has been a personal friend of presidents and, in his own words, an antagonist of presidents. His column, Watch on Washington, and his investigative journalism ability have won him honors outside Iowa as a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. He was born in Iowa, graduated from Drake University Law School, and is now chief of the Des Moines Register, Washington, D.C. News Bureau. When we first invited our speaker to come, we knew that we were getting a great writer, but thanks to summer TV coverage, we are also getting a great television star. We are honored to have with us today Mr. Clark Molenhoff, who will speak on campaign financing and Watergate.
Thank you, Gene and Jean, and ladies, and I guess there are a few gentlemen here. Things are a little upset in Washington these days. We don't know exactly what the line of succession is there. And the vice president's having so many problems. You remember his friend Frankie Sinatra? There's a story going around that Sinatra is hanging around with gangsters now to improve his image. Good news on the Fitzgerald case in the last few days after about 4 years, which the president says proves that the civil service system works in protecting the rights of employees. It's a little late on that. Reminds me of the story that Gordon Rule, the Navy cost cutter who lost his job a little earlier, well, late last year and retrieved it in January, tells about the corporation executives who were searching for a surefire way to get a cost accountant. And one of them said he asked them one question. That's, what is 2 and 2? Phyllis says, well, everyone knows 2 and 2 is 4. How does that help you out? He says, the fellows who say 4 never get the job. The ones who say, what figure do you have in mind, are the ones I hire. They call this creative accounting. There's been a little too much creative accounting in Washington, and I might say in miscellaneous state and local governments around the country. That's why we're having the problems we're having today. The topic of discussion, campaign financing and Watergate, is going to be a little lopsided here. I'm going to deal only very briefly with campaign financing, and I hope it won't disappoint you that I will deal in some depth with Watergate. First place, in a general way, Watergate says nothing to support public financing of campaigns. It says a lot that's wrong with our operations, but I have some skepticism about getting the government into the business of financing public officials running for office. Now, that does not mean I'm against it. I just have some skepticism, having viewed public officials, having viewed the weaknesses in laws, the weaknesses in the administration of those laws over an extended period of time, fear that this could well turn into the biggest boondoggle of all times. However, within the last few days, in fact today in Washington, the General Accounting Office is going on record in favor of some kind of limited public funding of campaigns. That's the best news that I've heard, that Elmer Stotts and Sam Hughes, who's the director of the Office of Campaign Federal Elections, believe that there is a practical way that this can be administered, because the GAO is, after all, the watchdog of the Congress, and the men over there are very practical in what programs can be administered and which can't. However, without getting into a position of opposing or endorsing public financing or any one of the many programs that are before the Congress, there is one thing that is the single most effective step that the Congress could take in federal campaign financing, and that would be to give the General Accounting Office a subpoena power to get the records. They have not had that subpoena power in the past in dealing with either the federal election laws or the general problems of government contracts. Even with this power, without this power, the GAO was the most powerful independent force preventing a successful administration cover-up on the Nixon Re-Election Committee's financing of the Watergate burglary. If you'll remember back to July of 1972, the whole problem for the administration in its cover-up, and it was a cover-up, and it's a proven, admitted cover-up now, and it's a proven, admitted obstruction of justice by many of the parties. The only thing we don't know now is the amount of involvement of the president himself. But having said that, the problem that they had at that stage in covering up was this new election law, and the fact that the GAO, which was an independent body, could come in, and that the FBI, under that good old fella, Pat Gray, who said Fat Gray, fat-headed Pat Gray, and the Justice Department under Richard Kleindienst. And Kleindienst is a fellow who I think wanted to run a good Justice Department, but felt this tremendous pressure from the White House in connection with the Nixon Re-Election Committee and the White House involvement, and gave ground in some measure to this. Now, the only reason that these people stood pat as far as they did in doing a job of administering the laws is because they knew that the GAO was over there and was in a position where it had the responsibility to obtain detailed reports on the financing. And even though they didn't have subpoena power, that there was some point down the road, weeks or months later, that the Nixon Re-Election Committee had to be in a position where it would be accountable publicly to someone other than old Pat Gray and Richard Kleindienst. Had this been in a posture where Nixon and Nixon White House, and to say this, even if Nixon wasn't involved, which is still up in the air, the fact that Haldeman and Ehrlichman and John Dean were involved to the extent they were would have meant an intolerable pressure on the Justice Department and the FBI to cover up. If there had not been this countervailing pressure from the GAO and the authority it had and responsibility it had, they could have just phonied up the record. And on that point, in the past, keeping in perspective the Nixon scandals, in the past, there has not been this tool from the GAO on elections. I'm certain in my own mind that something comparable to what we've had in the Watergate could have erupted out of the Bobby Baker scandals back in '63 and '64. I am also certain that at miscellaneous other times in our history, just the tips of the iceberg that we've seen could have demonstrated something comparable. I'm not saying fully as bad as this, but bad in the respect to the basic obstruction of justice, which is the key thing that is most important here. The scandals, the people trying to fix elections, the illegal contributions will always take place as long as you have people, because it's inevitable that there will be some people who will try to cut corners. The only thing that really distressed me in this instance, and that distresses me in every situation, is where the power of the Justice Department, the power of the judiciary, and the FBI are used to cover up, in these instances, to destroy the records, to force people, young people in these instances most of the time, to commit perjury to cover up for the higher-ups. And the GAO was the only force against a successful cover-up. And it was almost successful even then. Just keep in mind, if Judge Sirica had been a normal Republican judge, subject only to the normal pressures, he wouldn't have done what he did in last March to force McCord to move into a position, and to not only to force McCord, to give McCord the belief that there was some place you could get an honest man in this society. And the fact that Sam Ervin is the man of stature that he is, uniquely qualified here by experience that you get through 76 years. I don't know what that is because I'm not there yet. I hope I get that far. But there is no way that he could have been better schooled for the job that he's been doing than the experience he's had as a lawyer, as a judge, and as a senator. And he is the one person in the Senate of the United States who was so schooled in a depth understanding of constitutional law and of the kind of a personality where he could get across the ideas in down-to-earth, sometimes earthy examples, and so that grave constitutional questions would become quite clear to most of the people who viewed television. And he is the only person who doesn't want to be President of the United States. It isn't that he wouldn't have later, but like he talks about his indiscretions are all behind him. He's at the point where he can't, well, I guess a fellow at 76 could run for president in 76, but it's highly unlikely, and he's at least ruled himself out, and he's the only one from a standpoint of personality, bearing, and so forth, who could talk down to the President of the United States. Now, I think that there would be many who would be entitled to talk down to this President of the United States. However, the job itself is the thing, the position. There are few people who can be above and drown out the voice of any president, regardless of how wrong he is on any subject, because he's not only able to project the ideas himself, but he is able to get all types of mouthpieces all over the country and within the party and within the cabinet to tell us how tired we are of Watergate, among other things. And how many are tired of Watergate? I say 2 or 3. I'm a little surprised that there are even a few. But this demonstrates that the president's word can get through. Now, the fact of the matter is, if we were to call off those Watergate hearings right now, that would be the greatest obstruction of justice there ever was, because there is the prima facie case at this stage, and Sam Ervin and the senators have it, that someone was involved in obstruction of justice, someone on a very high level. If they stopped short of demonstrating that, they would be as bad as Ehrlichman and Haldeman in October of 1972, when they decided initially, well, 5 burglars were going to be enough to pay the price, and then 7. On the question of, I'm hopeful that you will, in one area at least, present a unified front, and that would be on this business of giving the GAO the subpoena power, because it has to have it, it should have it. This is not saying that Elmer Stotts or Phil Hughes on their own should be permitted to go around and harass various public officials or their campaign finance chairman. It is to say that they must have an authority to get into court with the problem at an early enough stage so that it's a practical threat, and that they do not have to rely upon a grand jury, which may be under an administration. And I say this, it doesn't make any difference whether it would be a Democratic or Republican administration. They would all tend to be the same way, to cover for their own. They would do it in varying degrees. Now, the subject of executive privilege is one that is very much in the news these days, and it's really the crucial issue before the whole country. And I think that it would be, I hope you will find it interesting, to just review Mr. Nixon's record on this. It would be difficult to find a political figure who's done more of a turnabout on government secrecy and executive privilege than Richard Nixon. When he was in the House and Senate, he was an outspoken critic of President Truman's refusals to make information available to Congress in arbitrary cover-ups. In the House, on April 22nd, 1948, the then Congressman Richard Nixon expressed those views on Mr. Truman's expression of a right to withhold information. And this is Mr. Richard Nixon speaking April 22nd, 1948. The point has been made that the President of the United States has issued an order that none of his information can be released to Congress, and that therefore the Congress has no right to question the judgment of the President in making that decision. I say that proposition cannot stand from a constitutional standpoint or on the basis of merit, for this very good reason. That would mean the President could have arbitrarily issued an executive order in the Myers case, the Teapot Dome case, or in any other case, denying the Congress of the United States the information it needed to conduct an investigation of the executive department. In the interest of a complete airing of all of the facts and of dispelling these unfounded allegations, if they are that, it is essential that the entire contents of the letter be released to the Congress. Apply that to the present situation and the tapes. Until February 1973, when the Watergate case started closing in on the Senate Judiciary Committee's hearings on the nomination of Pat Gray, Mr. Nixon retained a reasonably liberal attitude with regard to making information available to the Congress. I might say I went to work for him in July of 1969 and believed that we were in complete agreement on executive privilege. It had been my position consistently over an extended period of time that executive privilege had no law to sustain it, had no court decisions behind it, and was a complete menace because it created an obsessive secrecy among those who believed they had it that would inevitably corrupt, because you can't trust any individuals with the ability to cover their own crimes, to refuse to disclose the public's business when they are involved in some manner embarrassing. This is true, and I've traced this in my book, Washington Cover-Up, where the Truman administration tried to use it. The Eisenhower administration used it with regard to the Dixon-Yates case. The Truman administration had used it on tax scandals and on some subversive matters. The Eisenhower administration used it on the Dixon-Yates case, the Sherman-Adams matter, the Wolf-Latijinsky case, and some foreign aid scandals. Kennedy used it with regard to the Billy Saul Estes matter, with regard to the TFX scandals. Johnson didn't use executive privilege. He just used Johnson privilege, which meant he was going to withhold it, and he didn't give a damn what anybody thought, and he wasn't even going to try to justify it. Well, that you can deal with. But when I discussed with Mr. Nixon the business of going to the White House as special counsel, we went into this business of executive privilege in some detail. And I believed that he believed as I did, that this was a corruptive thing. And as the first 2 or 3 years went by, his use of it was not excessive. It was not as much as Kennedy or Johnson. He used it to cover a few little embarrassments, but they had used it in that manner, and we can expect all of our political figures to try a few little bits of magic to hide their own sins. And it wasn't really until the ITT affair in April of 1972 that Nixon took this to the extent of prohibiting Peter Flanagan from going before the Judiciary Committee in connection with the ITT matter. And the committee at that time engaged in a compromise, which gave the people in the White House the belief that they could always come out on top. This was in April '72, just 2 months before the Watergate burglary. And the Judiciary Committee compromised and agreed that they would only ask Peter Flanagan, if he came up, if he was kind enough to come up, to let them talk to him, that they would only ask him questions within a certain sphere. Having made that arrangement, they were caught with it. But it was not a very good example for the people in the White House, who I had been trying to convince for several years that executive privilege was bad business, not only because it was a secrecy that couldn't be justified, but that inevitably you would get caught. And that's a point that usually is a better argument than the fact that it's wrong. You know, you might get caught. It's not only wrong, but you might get caught. Most of them don't mind doing something wrong once in a while if it's for the party. But if you get caught, that's the bad part. Well, they had used this executive privilege over a period of months and years with regard to Dr. Henry Kissinger. And there was some degree of logic to not letting Dr. Kissinger go up before a hostile Senate Foreign Relations Committee at a time when the United States was engaged in sensitive negotiations in various parts of the world. But there was less logic to the Flanagan thing, and they finally had to cave. Now, for the purposes of a successful cover-up, it was probably preferable that the burglary of the Watergate actually have White House people involved in it rather than outsiders, because then you could claim executive privilege. If it had just been burglars on the outside, why, hell, there wouldn't be any executive privilege involved at all. And this was the Haldeman-Ehrlichman theory. When the burglary and bugging of Democratic headquarters went astray with the arrest of the 5 men, it was only logical that those involved could have confidence of a successful cover-up. Executive privilege had covered the White House and activities and government personnel. They had Kleindienst in their pocket. They had Pat Gray on their side. That was a real coup on their side. He wanted to be permanent director, so they could really manipulate him around. The Watergate cover-up proceeded with hardly a ripple and with no need for even making a reference to executive privilege. President Nixon held as few press conferences as possible. Ron Ziegler described it as a third-rate burglary, and it was at least that, and denied all charges. And the public, prior to the election, and I might say in this respect, the press, particularly the Washington Post and the New York Times, were extremely diligent and did a great job with regard to Watergate. However, I would like to remind you that on the same basic principles, in some earlier years, they had not been as diligent when it was the Kennedy administration or the Johnson administration. This is not said to criticize them for their diligence in the Nixon case. It is to criticize them for not applying the same standard at the earlier period of time. Because we must be consistent with regard to administrations. We cannot have ideological hang-ups as a press. And part of the fault, part of the responsibility for Watergate is on the back of the press. Executive privilege, when it was used by Kennedy and Johnson, was actually endorsed by the New York Times and the Washington Post, and I might say, in a couple of cases, by the Des Moines Register, contrary to my view, but there are a lot of things that are contrary to my view. And that's good too. There's no one who should be a standard for anything. He should try to be, but that's, you can't kid yourself that you're right on even most of the things most of the time. You can try to be. But the press, in going for executive privilege, in supporting executive privilege when it was Kennedy and when Johnson was using it, led the Nixon administration and President Nixon to believe Kennedy got by with it, why can't I? Johnson got by with it, why can't I? There was only one reason why, and I tried to explain this to them. There was going to be a stricter standard applied to Richard Nixon. That was a fact of life. There is a double standard in the press. It's just because most reporters are of a liberal bent, most editors. And most of them are Democrats. They shouldn't be, but that's a fact of life. And Richard Nixon, as an experienced politician, should have known that he was not going to win by thinking he could get by with what Kennedy and Johnson were getting by with. And he had to, in attacking this, not attack the press generally, but find specific things that he would deal with where there was unfairness, which there has been, and not get into the business of generally blasting the press, because some of us were on his side when we thought he was right. On the Vietnam War, for example. I was generally in accord with what he was doing, not because I thought he made every move right, but because, first place, he did not get us into it. He had a difficult problem. Over a period of time, he did get us out. The question of whether he wavered, he did just exactly what I would do or what someone else would say to do at those various stages is immaterial. He was moving in generally the right direction, and we are out of Vietnam. And so on that point, those who seek to criticize him in that area are going into the very battleground, the battlefield, where he is strongest, and his positions relative to national security that he has raised with regard to the Ellsberg case. If he can get this over into the field of national security, he is going to win, because most of the people of the country feel that extraordinary steps can be justified from time to time relative to the life of the country. Now, I don't agree at all that you can go over the Fourth Amendment rights or the Fifth Amendment rights or the Sixth Amendment rights of anyone. But you can sell this to a large number of people, and the large support that he had on Vietnam, probably 70%, demonstrates this. And I don't believe in polls completely, but in a general way, I think that that's about it. In a general way, also, I think that the polls are right when they say that the people do not believe his version on Watergate. They believe that he knew something of the cover-up back as early as the fall of 1972 and had some role in it. So incidentally, I want to ask just a few questions here. Get a show of hands. How many in this group now believe that the president knew and had some role in the Watergate burglary itself? You don't like Richard Nixon at all. How many believe that he knew something about the cover-up at some point last fall? Yeah, that's about like the polls show. I'd say about 70%. That's an interesting. Now, how many people think he didn't know about the cover-up? One brave soul. You believe the president and not John Dean. You believe the president, and you do not believe the John Dean version. Oh, well, I'm glad you make, because the evidence last fall, while reasonably firm, indicating he did, I think it became firm that sometime in February, prior to March 21st, and that's So in other words, his version that he didn't know anything to March 21st, you wouldn't put your hand up. 100%. Nobody believes the president. Because didn't you hear him say that he didn't know anything about this till John Dean came in on March 21st? Well, this is most significant because it's a serious problem of credibility. And even though many of you will be, and I am sympathetic with many of the problems that are before this country and the difficulty he's having with them, and will continue to have with them, as you deal with these problems, the economic problems or the international affairs problems, the place that you must start is with a high degree of credibility, because there is no social program and there's no international program, regardless of how much you know about it, where you can spell out from A to Z, this is the way it's going to turn out 100%. There has to be a high degree of belief in the man who is devising the program, because he's the only one who can conceivably know enough to make the programs. That's what we assume. Now, as he's selling his various economic programs and the like, he has to start out with, "You must believe me." And when Richard Nixon starts saying, "You must believe me," there's at least 75% of every audience that says, "So what's new? And why?" We're down to about 15 minutes. I rambled and rambled and rambled, and I was going to have some questions. And I think when I'm talking, see, I know I'm interested because I'm probably hearing it for the first time, at least that way. But when I get questions from the audience, then I know there's at least one person interested in what my response is going to be. So I like to open up for questions here if you have any questions. Yes?
How do you assess the Agnew situation?
I'm glad you asked me that question. Well, to start with, I don't think that Agnew will resign, because I can't see any advantage to him in resigning. He is not a man of wealth, unless Frankie Sinatra has taken care of him, someone side, or unless he saved up something out of all those contributions he was getting. But he's been living pretty high, and he has every advantage of keeping on that payroll as vice president. That's pretty good pay. In addition, I don't think President Nixon wants to get rid of him. Now, that doesn't mean that President Nixon or somebody close to President Nixon isn't creating some of these little problems for Mr. Agnew. I had some discussion just yesterday with people in the White House and some people not in the White House on this. And Mr. Nixon has every advantage in keeping the pot brewing for Mr. Agnew so that it's in the news periodically, so that it keeps the spotlight, so they can't pull that spotlight back onto Mr. Nixon. Because if you go back on Mr. Nixon, there's a question of the tapes and the obstruction of justice. And it's to his advantage, though, to keep even a bruised Agnew there for as long as possible, because that's unsettling, not only to you, but to the members of Congress. Think of the people in the House and Senate. They say, "Oh, we don't want Nixon." Well, what's the alternative? Agnew? And 6 weeks ago, there would have been a large number of conservative Republicans who would have said, "Agnew, great, we like him better than Nixon." And there would be a great large number of liberals who were ready to throw Nixon overboard even if he hadn't been wrong. And the combination might have made a successful impeachment possible. But now Agnew has tossed a whole new factor into this, and as long as that keeps going, Nixon's got it made. See, he's in the position where that 25th Amendment is going to let him name who's his vice president. And it's to his advantage not to get some man of stature who everybody will want to be president, because that will create the alternative that he doesn't want. So if he can just keep Agnew on the fire long enough, and then when he gets charred, if he throws him out the window, then he starts throwing trial balloons up on, and I can see it now, the statesman. I want to be sure that I get the best man possible. I want everyone in the country to send me their selection. We're going to have a great big contest. Whoever gets the most votes, we're going to select him from who's who. Anybody who's been in who's who is eligible. And I can see him retaining that posture while some of his little people run around and whisper in Dave Broder's ear and Scotty Reston's ear, oh, don't you think Connolly's the man? Or Richardson's the man? Or Percy's the man? And then get all these trial balloons shot down. And that'd take months. And then the term's almost over with. By the time you get into 1976, well, the Congress says, so what? He's only got a few more months to go. Why should we all get involved in a big impeachment thing where we're going to have to go on record? We don't like to go on record anyway on anything. Does that answer your question? Yes. Why, I think the press has been destroying his image, and on most of the time they've done it best when they have reported it accurately. The fact of the matter is, the only time where they have aided his image is where they have abused him and overstated on some ideological things like the Vietnam War and a lot of other things where he might be right. He has no one but himself to thank for whatever the image problems he's having these days. He kept Ehrlichman and Haldeman, and he is still, even at this stage, saying what great public servants they are. He indicates he'd like to have them back. I knew them well. To know them is to love them. You can quote me on that, and that won't get me in any trouble. Yeah.
How do you feel about public campaign spending money? That is, do you think that all federal campaigns should be publicly financed?
I tried to dodge that question. I think that there would be some, and I said earlier, the GAO favors some kind of limited campaign financing from public funds. This may be necessary, and there are many arguments why this keeps the big campaign contributors down to size. However, it also is highly complicated. The question of whether it's just in general elections, how many candidates it covers. Does it cover all primaries or just those primaries in which the primary itself is tantamount to an election? There are a number of bills pending before the Senate and House at the present time that have miscellaneous types of formulas. The GAO did not endorse any one of those formulas. It picked little pieces from various parts of the Hart legislation, Kennedy-Scott legislation, and Mathias legislation, and put them together. But it was not an endorsement that this is something we're sure will work. It's something that might be a step in the right direction. It's like a welfare program. You can have the best welfare program in the world. And if you get the wrong kind of regulations or the wrong kind of an administrator, and those are the key things, and I think that we've been extremely fortunate to have the GAO and Elmer Stotts and Phil Hughes. See, Phil Hughes, who was the director of the Office of Federal Elections, is ideal for this spot because he is at a point where he was retired as a government official. The GAO, where he had been working in highly complicated areas in government for a long period of time. He is a man of impeccable character and nonpartisan as can be. And he simply tries to get these things down to a point of administration. And there is no way that you could buy Phil Hughes, because even if the Comptroller General, Elmer Stotts, who I have the same kind of regard for, happened to be a bad guy and was bringing pressure on him to do something political, Hughes would walk out like Senator Hughes did. He probably might not go to the ministry, but and we have yet to see what Senator Hughes is going to do on that point. I don't know how we got Senator Hughes into this. I know how. I brought him in. But I'm not for it. I think we should be skeptical of it, not cynical about it. Did I dodge it adequately? Yes. Well, it was the two young reporters, Woodward and Bernstein, but they were on the Post, and that project had the top priority from Kay Graham herself and of all of the editors, because young reporters on a staff do not go off on their own on that kind of project and have the kind of space that they were given with the kind of chances they were taking at miscellaneous stages last fall. Well, I think that that's a proper question to ask. I think that when I would go over to the Ron Ziegler's press conferences last fall, in September and October, asking him questions about the key issue on the financing of the burglars and the evidence that there was of Nixon re-election committee financing the burglars. And the Nixon re-election committee, of course, was denying at that stage. And Ron Ziegler was able to get by with what amounted to a brush off of my questions, which were on sound, factual basis. And I might say that the people in the White House press corps who enjoy a kind of a Ronnie baby relationship with Ron Ziegler are as much responsible, because they treated my questions in a very cold manner. I mean, if I didn't have the guts to stand up there by myself and not give a damn what any of them thought, I would have wilted, because it was not a friendly atmosphere. Now, afterwards, months later, why, they come up and they pat you on the back. That's the kind of questions to ask, Clark. Why, you should have been, the kind of questions they should have been asking all along. And the same thing applies to a wide range of the press and its treatment of the Watergate burglary last fall. And I might say that actually the biggest menace in this was George McGovern. His irresponsible treatment of Watergate and his silly damn treatment of the Defense Department budget. I was trying to find some reason to vote for George McGovern. And then he'd open his mouth. And he scared hell out of me. And I voted for Richard Nixon. And if I had that choice today, well, I'm not sure which way I'd go, which gives you a good indication of why the landslide. Richard Nixon did not win a landslide. George McGovern lost a landslide. Yes, one quick question, I'm told here. It says here on the slip. One more quick question. There isn't any question about it. The fact of the matter is, the Watergate has not helped Teddy Kennedy one bit, personally, because whenever you get into the term cover-up itself, the Chappaquiddick cover-up comes to mind. And, well, well, if there was a Chappaquiddick cover-up. Now, whether his version at the present time is accurate, I don't know. Only he can tell us that for sure. But he gave 2 or 3 inconsistent versions in the first 48 hours, and that in and of itself was an attempted cover-up. And the fact that your grand jury minutes and so forth are not available, I don't know as that is necessary to find out what's in those grand jury minutes to be able to say there was a Chappaquiddick cover-up for a 48 to 72-hour period of time. Whether we've got the full story now, we'll never know. And Mr. Kennedy is always vulnerable on this point and probably will be through the rest of his political career. And it's probably unfair in that respect. That he should, but, you know, it's, and we can hope, really, that, I wish that I had faith that voters had that long a memory on all issues. Well, thank you.
Really sorry to cut you off because I know there's lots more interest, but at this point in time, we must we must move very quickly to our other workshops. Those who want to hear more from Mr. Mollenhoff stay in this room for the discussion that will follow on U.S. Congress.
a new kind of a gavel, I guess. Is it working? Are these mics working?
Yeah, coming through loud and clear.
Am I supposed to welcome you again? Is anybody here that wasn't welcomed properly by Gene Lloyd Jones? I'll do it all over again. What we had in mind here was just continuing as far as the workshop is concerned. We're just starting another phase of it in which, of course, you all I know are as vitally interested in the U.S. Congress item as I am, naturally, and in the fact that we got campaign financing as a consensus questions on national board. I'll explain a little bit, perhaps for Clark. I don't know how familiar he is with league procedure, but when we have study items, then we have consensus questions that are put out by national board, and this is what we are working on this fall. Yeah. And we will be through all of our units discussing campaign financing, answering certain questions. The consensus will come from the local board I was going to say in Iowa, but that's not true, all over the country, back to the national office in Washington, D.C., and then we will have a league consensus on campaign financing, which part of the hope of it, of course, is it will not be too narrow to restrict us and not so broad that it doesn't